Hello, everybody. Adrian Plus here,
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
and this is the 30th week in which we've done this. Although we weren't here last Friday,
No, because it was
um,
Christmas Day.
but what is today?
Well, today is New Year's Day,
Yeah,
and of course, for our friends in Australia, it's the end of the first day of the new year.
yeah.
And I think they're probably in a slightly more comfortable place than we are in the UK,
Well,
really.
certainly one or two people we've heard from are in very clear areas where the virus
Yeah.
appears to be under control.
Stampeding. It's been, I think, a week of kind of races, really. We've heard about in the UK of the race to get Brexit done and what everyone thinks about that. I think there'll be a lot of people maybe breathing a sigh of relief that at least whatever there is a trade deal of some sort. I don't know. It's pretty incomprehensible. But the other race is one that's far more maybe urgent. It's the sort of good and evil race, isn't it,
Well, it
between the
is, yeah.
vaccine and the
The
virus?
vaccine. About I was at the doctor's yesterday, and there was a sign. I was on my own actually in the waiting room. There was a sign saying vaccines will be distributed in order,
Yeah.
and we will let patients know when they are available. Obviously, trying to calm the panic that perhaps is arising in people. But yeah, it is like a race. It's almost like one of those visible horror films, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you
Or a
don't know
superhero
what's
one,
going
yeah.
to win. You remember years ago we saw a film called Attack of the Killer Tomatoes,
Well, you saw it.
where
I didn't.
the tomatoes suddenly smashed against the windscreen of a car. I mean, it was utterly ludicrous. But this is like a real life kind of
Horror film.
horror film
Yes, it
where
is.
everyone is trying to make it possible in
Yeah,
time.
yes, absolutely. And what a strange Christmas it's been for so many people. I mean, we have heard from some people, haven't we, who've been very busy and very positive, trying to make things happen in their communities and their churches. You know, people who have been as a church finding out who is on their own and won't have a Christmas dinner and doing that, and other people doing drive-through services and all sorts of things. So there have been some positive things, but we've heard from other people, haven't we,
Yeah.
who've just been
Well, I
devastated,
think
really.
yeah, I think it's been a time of great disappointment for some people.
Of course.
Because you build up your hopes for something normal, something celebratory,
Yeah.
and it all falls down.
And it was kind of
Um,
promised and then taken away. And
yeah,
although it's obvious why.
it's very easy, as you said, to get to me earlier, to get wobbly, isn't it? To start doubting all sorts of things about yourself and the situation you're in. So we're going to have to hold our nerves somehow. And
Yeah, it's not always easy to stay positive, though, is it?
no,
Do you remember the sketch? I know some people will have heard it. We call it Pure Joy, and it's all about
well, it's based on the first verses in the Book of James, isn't it?
yeah,
Which say you must regard all difficulties as pure joy because they're character building. Well, thank you, James.
yes.
I wish you were here to
Yeah.
share that today.
But the thing is, we say in that sketch, "Oh my goodness, the car won't start, and there's water coming through the ceiling." Well, on the 23rd of December, so 2 days before December, those of you who've been with us for the last few months will know that I broke my ankle 6 weeks ago, and so that means I'm trundling around downstairs in a wheelchair. Well, I'm in the wheelchair in the kitchen, and I think it's pretty cold. I'll just turn on the central heating. And the next thing is there's a massive bang. There's steam coming out of the boiler. There's water all over the floor. And all I can think of is I don't want to get my plaster wet. I don't think I did a lot of rejoicing at that point. I know I yelled for you.
Yes, I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was actually I heard our son calling out.
Yeah.
Mum says the boiler's exploded,
Yes, well, it did.
and I mean it wasn't funny,
No,
but
it wasn't.
anyway,
Not a lot of rejoicing. And,
no,
and
and I don't think that's what that's about anyway. I don't.
no.
I think it's madness to suppose that you go around waving your arms joyfully because your boiler's exploded. We
Because
still
you-
haven't got our
No,
boiler.
we
have
haven't. So 8-9 days in, we're still no hot water,
And
but
no
you know,
heating, yeah.
never mind.
Yeah,
And Christmas did happen. It did happen.
Yeah,
for
it did.
people in a way.
yeah, it did. Did
Jesus,
for us.
we
Did for
remember,
us.
was born.
Yeah,
You know, I was. We were given a most beautiful translation or interpretation of the Bible, of the New Testament, weren't we, at Christmas? And
Yeah,
and,
it was a
and,
lovely
and the thing
book,
that
yeah.
you know how things just jump out at you. And I was just reading to you actually the beginning of John, and in the beginning was the Word, and the traditional words are He came. What is it? He came among His own,
with his
and
own.
His own rejected him or didn't know him or whatever.
Yeah.
And this version says He came among those He created. And I thought, connected with the fact that John begins, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And I thought, yes, of course, Jesus was in the beginning of creation, and He came among those who had, followed the line of creation, really.
Yeah.
And how strange that must have been, because of that sense of creating in the image of God and creating something with the potential to do good
Yeah.
and the free will to not. And I was thinking about the fact that Jesus kind of popped in, didn't he, all the way through the Old Testament? Well, not very often.
Well,
but
it's
you get that feeling.
It's quite
he did.
interesting, isn't it? What were you thinking of?
Well, I know it's not defined as him, but the fourth person in the furnace has often been thought of as being King Nebuchadnezzar. He said something like he looks like a god, didn't he, or a son of a god, and there is a sense that it was Jesus walking with them in that.
But
furnace.
for those who don't know, and there can't be many, I mean, Daniel's
well, this was Shadrach, Meshach, and
associates,
Abednego.
when they were exiled and they became top guys in the court, and then these 4 were sent into the furnace, and
No, 3 were sent into
three
the
were sent
furnace.
into the
Shadrach,
furnace.
Meshach, and Abednego.
and they just walked around unharmed, and there was a 4th one in there, and there's something really enticingly mysterious
There
about
is.
the idea of someone popping in.
Yeah. I love that. And of course, the other time that I can think of is when Abraham's sitting outside his tent, and Sarah's old, and as far as they're concerned, despite the fact that Abraham had been promised children, Sarah was too old to have any children. And then these visitors turn up. And
Yeah.
it definitely says the Lord. Now, I know some people say it was the angel of the Lord and whatever,
Yeah.
but you know what? It sounds like the Jesus we meet in the New Testament, don't you think?
In what way do you mean?
I just think there's a wit. There's a sternness, because, Sarah, he says to Sarah, next time I come, next year, you'll have a child. And she laughs, and he gets quite narky, really, and says, well, I am God.
Yes.
I can do anything. Why are you laughing? Yeah. And she sort of hides because she's embarrassed. But it's the next bit, It's the bit where they look towards
Bargaining
Sodom.
one.
And there's something about that exchange.
Yeah. You mean when God says, I'm going to destroy it all,
Yeah,
and Abraham starts bargaining?
it does.
And I think, what does he start with? If I can
I
find
think it's 50 to
50
start
people,
with.
50 good people,
Yeah.
will you not do it? And he says, all right, I won't. And obviously then there is a dearth of good people, and Abraham says, what about 40?
Yes.
And finally goes down to 10, I think.
Yeah, he does.
And it's an atmosphere that we lose, certainly in the modern evangelical church,
Yes.
of encountering and taking God on, not in a negative way, but when you read about other people Jesus encountered, he loved passion and wit, didn't he?
He did. And I just think there's a little bit of a twinkle there, but maybe I'm wrong. But I mean, when Abraham says, I don't have the right to ask you, Lord, but what would you do if you find only 20? And he says, well, because of them, I won't destroy the city. And then Abraham says, please don't get angry, Lord, if I speak just once more. Suppose you find only 10 good people.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's just that sense of a genuine.
Well, it's a bit more interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
than the strange straight lines we get trapped in at the moment.
Yeah.
No, I think it's great.
But you know, I was thinking about this race I said about at the beginning, a race to get things done. And in a way, Jesus he only had 3 years, didn't he? 3 years. And in a way, that was a race against time, wasn't it?
Yes, he did. He had 3 years to somehow affect the priorities of people forever, for those who accepted it, and to turn everything upside down, which he did, the accepted norms, and to really challenge power. And the interesting thing, I think, about we're talking about wit and a different approach, is that I've always said Jesus was a judo expert.
Oh yes.
And judo. I think judo means the silent art, something like that. Can't quite remember, but someone's going to tell me I'm wrong. But what Jesus did was to use the impetus of other people's prejudices or attitudes to take them off their feet and land them where he wanted them to be. In other words, someone says, "Who is my brother?" And Jesus knows where
my neighbor,
knows where they're coming from, and uses their own strength and passion, those people's passion and strength, to bring them to the place where he wants them to be through story, or through simply speaking right into the middle of them. Sometimes, it's a wonderful art. And it still happens and can still happen now.
I mean, it is a wit, isn't it, that he both uses and loves. I mean, you love the story of the Syrophoenician woman, don't you? Because you reckon that he had a bit of a twinkle in his eye about that, really. That, that her challenging meant that, I don't know, that he responded. He loved it. He loved proper getting things going and genuine debate, genuine argument.
It's interesting. I mean, I it's the most interesting story that we can't go into it in depth now, but there's no doubt Jesus wanted a day off. If you read that piece, and he actually rejected her before this happened. We rarely talk about the temptations Jesus experienced after going into the desert and all that. But clearly he was tempted throughout his life. I don't know. Maybe he thought, I'm not going to do anything here. I don't know. But I do know that when they had that conversation, something changed in him.
Yeah, it did.
So there we are.
And that's where I don't
Don't
know.
know.
I think there is a sort of twinkle somehow in his responses to things. And is certainly not glassy-eyed and peering into the distance. But the race, if you're going back to his race against time, race, if you think about, well, I don't know, I suppose the bargaining tools for Brexit are, what can we get out of it as a country? But actually his race was it was almost like a sort of three-legged race, wasn't it? I mean, he was handicapped by love. That wasn't a straightforward race. What can I, as Jesus, get out of it? It was a continual and constant meeting of people that diverted him from what he was going to do, or slowed him down, or constant sort of a handicap of love, I think, really.
It's it, and we still have it. I mean, even in our relationships with each other, love changes what you do and what you decide. And sometimes that can be really, really difficult for people. But and the race isn't necessarily what you thought it was going to be, is it? Thinking of Paul running the race.
He talks about it as though it's really straightforward and he'll run the race.
Well, he was the sort of man who would want to do that. I mean, he was out of his shed after being blind, preaching in the churches within a very short time. But actually, it's very clear that he had to use some of his energy to really concentrate on people for long periods.
Yes.
3 years in one place.
Yeah.
He actually was arguing and talking and
Yeah. And the one
making
place,
his way forward with them.
the one place he wanted to get to, he only got to in chains, didn't he? Which was Rome. I mean, it
That's
wasn't.
right, yeah.
That's where
Yeah.
he wanted to be.
Yeah.
But it was a funny old race, really. And it's so easy for us to feel somehow we're failing in the race, or God's failing in the race, or whatever, because we're in such a strange situation, really.
Yeah, the plans we make as people are not, I know it's a hackneyed thing to say, are not God's plans. That is not the race.
No.
But actually understanding that is very difficult.
And now we have his Spirit. I mean, that's what we're told. That
Yeah.
his Spirit, the same Spirit, you know, Jesus looked at people and you know, they did have something of his creation in them that he wanted to bring out again and again and again. So when he looked at people, it's as though a lot of people just wanted to be the best of themselves, like Zacchaeus and whatever. And maybe the Holy Spirit is doing the same thing, kind of popping into our hearts and nudging us and wanting us to find that. Am I talking rubbish?
No.
That bit of that God created and put
No,
in
I
us.
was just thinking that I think it probably should be more than a nudge.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just thinking of Jesus looking up and saying, "I'm coming to eat at your house."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean that can only be because something in him said, "Do it.
That's the
Say
right way
that.
for him. Yes.
Do this now.
Yeah.
This man is important, or will be
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
So bring him down, take him home,
Yeah.
see what comes of this."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we have always, in the modern church, I had a sort of feeling that maybe God was sort of nudging me. I find nothing of that in the Bible. I don't say it isn't true at all, but
Yeah, and I mean those nudges, those pushes that you're talking about with maybe with Zacchaeus, but those little nudges. We had a lovely little story sent to us
Jules.
by somebody.
Oh,
I'm
sorry,
going to
somebody
read
we
you
know, yeah.
her
Yeah.
little story.
yeah,
Because I think it's interesting,
Yeah,
really.
go on, it's a
Last
good
week,
story.
I was walking up to the village, and bearing in mind the time of year, making its way across the road was a very furry black caterpillar. Well, I couldn't leave him there, could I? So I gently scooped him up and put him safely in some bushes in a garden. And she says, "Would you have done the same thing?" I asked various of our home group, most of whom said yes they would, and admitted to saving snails, worms, and other garden creatures in much the same way. It isn't always about the big save the world, is it? There's lots of things we can do at ground level, I think. And then she says, especially if you're short like me, closer to the ground to see what's in trouble.
it's a wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think it sums up a lot of the best work done, that you get down to the level and you say, right, what's going on here? What really needs help? And
Yeah.
what can we do?
Yeah, we saw that in Africa, didn't we, when we were in Zambia?
Yes, we did. We went to a village, didn't we, that had been decimated by AIDS. We've probably talked about it before, but talking about races against time, they had their backs against the wall, didn't they? Because AIDS was literally wiping out. I mean, the grandparents were still there and a lot of children were orphaned, but the central section of society was disappearing fast. And do you remember they talked about a window of opportunity, and that was
That's
between
absolutely
5
right,
and
yeah.
15, and they
Yeah.
said that's where we
If
need
we can get to them there,
Yeah.
that will affect. And we heard from the kids, didn't we?
Yes.
We heard from the girls. They were playing netball instead of having sex.
Yes, they
That's
were.
what they
Well,
said
this
to us.
particular girl was very
Um,
stern.
Very stern indeed, yes. I don't know how they managed to persuade him of that.
No,
there
but
we
even
are.
young children
No,
were
absolutely.
doing plays about AIDS,
Yeah,
and they
yeah.
were. But what that made me think was that, sometimes things that window of opportunity, that God can take that
Yeah,
and can actually
yeah.
give something to a child that actually takes them through their lives.
Good old Marcus Rashford opened
Well, I was thinking about
little
you
windows,
first,
didn't
really. I was
Well,
thinking,
yeah.
know, just briefly. I mean, something happened to you when you were quite a kid. It was just something that, quickly, I know
it just
where.
changed my life. Although it was another of the unsigned gifts from God, and it was just that I'd read somewhere the 3 words: "Everybody is I," and I puzzled and puzzled and puzzled over it, and finally suddenly saw an elderly lady crossing the road, had a stroke, very ordinary. I looked at her and I thought, she's the most important person in the world, and I'm just a bit player in her life, and I still know that, and it is, as we said before, a blessing and a burden to know that nobody you meet is unimportant. So I mean, we know that. We say we don't know much, but we do know that.
And you mentioned Marcus Rashford, and I think, you know, we talk about iconic moments during this horrible time, and obviously one of them was Captain Tom, but another one is this young football player, and it's not about him, it's about his mum. That's what I love. You know, his mum did her very best, and still they struggle financially. And what he is doing, because it came from his childhood and he's held on to it and is now using it to say, I am going to challenge whoever, whenever, whatever, because I know what it's like to go to bed hungry. And what he's doing is remarkable, and actually got the government to change their direction.
We don't know whether what they believe or don't believe, but wherever love is found in abundance like that, we know the origin of it. So we're always grateful to see that.
So
things.
We go into the new year, and we have no idea what it's going to be.
Yes.
Surely it's going to be a bit better than this one. But
I hope you find a good place in the race, and hope things go well.
Yes.
There's no guarantees.
Yeah.
But God bless you.
Even if you're just going to pick up a black furry caterpillar.
Yeah.
Yes.
God
bless.
See you next
Happy
time.
New Year, if we can say that. Bye-bye.